everyone. Well, let me just say, first of all, we are really grateful that all of you are here. This process is very important to us. As you well know, the consent decree was important to Baltimore, important to our community, and we believe that the reason that we're here is because what we want to do is make sure that we select the right group to monitor the Baltimore Police Department. As you all know, that early on we decided, our administration, that it was important to put together a consent decree with the assistance of the Department of Justice, our law department, our police department, and hearing from our community. We believe that we've prepared a document that will help us move our Baltimore Police Department further, and that it will become the kind of police department that our community will be proud of. We know that we've begun to make some progress already, looking at new technology, looking at how we interact the community with the police department. You know, I was proud to say the other day that our police department, working with the community, has developed their own basketball team. I think that's a good thing. But we also are developing relationships in the neighborhoods and communities. The reason that we've come to this point is because it was decided through the Department of Justice that we needed to be under a consent decree so that we can make all the changes that are necessary to improve police and community relations and to make sure that we have a police department that is fair and understands the importance of public safety, because when we hire a police department, we hire them to protect and serve. And so training is important, cultural diversity is important, and how we select those who will serve us is also important. So we ask you this evening that while you have an opportunity to listen to the four finalists, the groups, that you pay close attention to their understanding of a consent decree, their understanding of what the relationship of the community and the police should be, and also what kind of training should take place. We also want you to feel that we are selecting an organization that will have its eyes on the police department, but at the same time stand up a department that we will all be proud of. So we've come this far, but we've got a little ways to go. So we ask you to also think thoughtfully of the questions that you want to have answered. Because through this process, those of you who have questions will get to ask them. So let me say thank you all for coming, and let me thank all of those who participated in this process thus far, and we look forward to the outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pugh. I'm Tim McGatt with the United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, and I wanted to welcome all of you here tonight as well to this public forum where you have the opportunity to meet and ask questions of the candidates for the position of monitor of the consent decree between the Baltimore Police Department and the United States Department of Justice. As the mayor laid out, the consent decree is an agreement between the Department of Justice and the City of Baltimore and the Baltimore Police Department to make reforms to the Baltimore Police Department. And the monitor is an essential part of this task. The monitor is the agent of the court in this task and is reporting back to the court and to the community, to all of us, on the progress that's being made under the consent decree. So the role of the monitor is to look closely at those provisions of the agreement that was signed between the Baltimore Police Department in the United States, and make sure that those are actually being accomplished and to be able to report out so that we all know that that's actually being done. So a huge part of this for the monitor and for all of us is community involvement, making sure that all of you who are here in this room tonight And people throughout the diverse communities of Baltimore are involved in this matter moving forward, because one of the essential tasks that is laid out in the consent decree, as Mayor Pugh said, is to work on that relationship between the Baltimore Police Department and the community it serves, making sure that it is truly in service, making sure that it is really implementing the types of reforms that work for this community, that are not just a cookie cutter, but are in fact tailored to the community here in Baltimore, in the city of Baltimore. And then we need to make sure that the monitor can report out to everyone as an honest broker, calling balls and strikes. Is this provision of the agreement actually met, or is it not actually met? So that everybody can have confidence in this process moving forward. So the monitoring teams that are here tonight, the candidates for the monitoring team here tonight, will have the opportunity to describe for you how they are going to engage with all of you as part of this process and how they understand their role as part of this process. And it's really important for you to be able to engage with them directly, hear from them directly about how they are going to undertake those responsibilities. We want to make sure that the team that is selected gains the trust of everybody involved, of the court, of the city of Baltimore and the mayor, of the Baltimore Police Department, from the commissioner all the way down to the cop on the street, to the Department of Justice, earning that trust, but earning the trust of this community. And so to do so, it needs to be transparent to the community, to the public, through its reporting, through its meetings with members of the community, making sure that it gets results that are on time, that are cost effective for this community, that are practical, that understand the realities of Baltimore, and that fundamentally promote officer safety, promote public safety, because that's what we really all want to achieve here. We want to promote respect for the Constitution. That's what our investigation was all about. And then ultimately restoring public confidence in our police department, in our community, in our governmental institutions that are designed to serve all of us. So whichever candidate is selected, we want you to be able to interact with them, because we need to build a relationship. They need to build a relationship with you in order to be able to do their job and to do it well. And we need all of you in this room and throughout the community of Baltimore to stay engaged in this process moving forward. The Baltimore Police Department will not be the police department that we all want it to be if the community is not engaged with that police department, and if the community does not have the ability to affect the way the Baltimore Police Department polices. So we want you guys all to be involved, and we want you to hold us, the Department of Justice, the City of Baltimore, the Baltimore Police Department, and whatever monitoring team is selected, we want you to hold us accountable to make sure that the reforms that are instituted here are real and that they work for the City of Baltimore. So thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it. We have a sign language interpreter here to my left. If anybody needs one, we encourage you, you can move up towards the front and we can make sure that you have the ability to hear directly from them. We also have some different handouts that explain the consent decree and some different pieces of this process. If you need any of the information, please feel free to find me or any member. There's a number of DOJ folks from my team here tonight. There's also a number of folks from the city and the Baltimore Police Department here tonight. We're happy to answer any of your questions or direct you towards any information that you might need. So thank you all for coming. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Mr. McGatt. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Welcome to the last of 2 community forums for the Consent Decree Independent Monitor finalists. Thank you for coming tonight. My name is Shantae Guy, and I'm the Executive Director of Community Mediation in Baltimore City. I'll be your moderator this evening. Before we give the monitor finalists the opportunity to introduce themselves, I'd like to share the schedule with you this evening, along with expectations and requests around engagement. The restrooms are outside of this door and to your right down the hall. Smoking happens outside of this building, and we'd appreciate it if you'd silence your mobile devices at this time. The forum is scheduled to run until 9 p.m. From now until approximately 7:15 p.m., I'll pose questions that have been pre-submitted by Baltimoreans to the Department of Justice to the monitor candidates. Each monitor candidate will have 2 minutes to answer a question. I may pose a follow-up question to any or all of the candidates. At approximately 7:15, we'll begin the second portion of the forum, where each monitor candidate's entire team will be on the stage for 20 minutes, and then they'll have the opportunity to engage directly with you as audience members with the questions that you may have. At about 8:40, you'll have the opportunity to engage directly with any one or more of the monitoring teams that you have follow-up questions for. You should have received a survey and a contact sheet when you entered the auditorium. Whether you decide to leave early or stay for the entire forum, we'd appreciate it if you would complete the survey and either return it to someone with a green and black scarf or drop it off in the white box that is right outside of the room to your right. Last but not least, if you have any questions, anyone with a name tag or a green and black scarf can help you. So with that out of the way, we'll have our monitor finalists take no more than 1 minute to introduce themselves, and we'll start with the expert team.
Thank you. My name is Jeff Schlanger. I'd like to thank the parties for having us, progressing us to this stage. And I'd like to thank Morgan State for hosting this event in this beautiful facility and beautiful campus. I am the designee from the Exeter 21st Century Policing team. The designee is the primary monitor. My background, just briefly, is that I have served as a monitor for both LAPD and the University of Cincinnati Police Department. I am a former chief of staff at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. I'll be working hand in glove with Chuck Ramsey to my left.
Good evening, I'm Chuck Ramsey. I'm designated as the Deputy Monitor for the Exeter 21st Century Policing team. Thank you.
Next up is the Powers team.
Good evening. Thanks to Morgan. Thanks for the parties that put this together. Thankful that we have a consent decree. I'm Dr. Tyrone Powers. I'm the CEO and founder of the Powers Consulting Group. Very briefly, I'm a Baltimore City resident, born and reared here, graduated from Coppin State University. I'm a former FBI agent and a former Maryland State Trooper, and now the director of the Homeland Security and Criminal Justice Institute at Anne Arundel Community College, and I will be the primary monitor for this team.
Hi, good evening, buenas noches. I am Michelle Mendez. I am an immigrants' rights attorney, and I am also a proud Baltimore City resident. I've been a Baltimore City resident since 2005 when I came here to attend the University of Maryland School of Law, from which I graduated. It's an honor to be here with you tonight.
Thank you. Next up is Venable.
Thank you. And again, I want to thank all of you for taking the time to do this, because this is so important to all of us. My name is Ken Thompson. I'm the proposed monitor for the Venable team. I'm a lifelong resident of Baltimore City, having gone through all the schools in Baltimore. If you know Baltimore, we all love our high schools. I'm a City College graduate. I've been practicing law for 40 years, and all of that time has been in Baltimore City.
Thanks. My name is T. Bowman. I am a proposed deputy monitor. I too, like Ken and the other members of our team, are just highly honored to have the opportunity to sit on stage here and to be a part of this forum with so many other incredible people. So thank you, citizens of Baltimore and Mayor, for allowing us this opportunity. I have 34 years of public service, including the 29 years in policing, and we're looking forward to participating in this process.
And next is CNA.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rodney Monroe. I'm the former chief of police for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. I've been in law enforcement just shy of 40 years. Prior to Charlotte, I was the chief of police in Richmond, Virginia, and Macon, Georgia. I served 25 years with the D.C. Police Department in Washington, D.C., and it is indeed an honor to be before such a distinguished group of citizens of Baltimore, and we look forward to the opportunity. I am the proposed monitor for the CNA group, and I have with me today Dr. Johnny Rice.
Good evening. My name is Dr. Johnny Rice II. I'm assistant professor of criminal justice at Coppin State University. I was born and raised in the city of Baltimore, and I'm also a City College graduate. The past 15 to 16 years, I have experience in working in low-income communities throughout the city, and I will serve, if afforded this opportunity, as the community liaison for the CNA group.
Thank you, CNA. So we'll begin with the pre-submitted questions. The first question will go to Exeter. It is around community trust. How will your members overcome the distrust community members have for law enforcement, both on your team and in BPD? And how will you help BPD officers gain the trust of the community members that helps make Baltimore a safer city?
Thank you. Before we can get at how we build trust or rebuild trust, we need to understand why distrust exists in the first place. The Exeter 21st Century Policing Team has a great deal of experience in bridging that divide between police and community. Our team members, having worked in cities like Seattle, Los Angeles, Cleveland, my own experience in Philly and in the District of Columbia, as well as having served as co-chair of President Obama's task force on 21st century policing, which 4 additional members of our team also was part of. How do we go about doing that? It starts with setting up opportunities for individual interaction between police and community, positive interactions, interactions where there's respect given to the people that we serve. It also begins with a mindset that needs to be part of policing. You've probably heard of this whole issue of guardian versus warrior mindset. We're not at war with the communities that we serve, but we do need to have that guardian mindset, not just protecting people from crime and disorder, but also protecting their constitutional rights as well. How do we understand where we are with distrust? A lot of it starts with history. The history of policing in America has not been positive. The current history is not always that positive, and we need to acknowledge that. We need to own up to it and really begin working to bridge that divide. It also begins with transparency and oversight, civilian oversight. There's nothing we should do that we should be afraid of showing in terms of community oversight. All those things combined can lead to a better, safer city. And we also have experience in one very important area, and that is we know how to engage and achieve police reform and at the same time reduce crime. Thank you.
Thank you, Exeter. Powers Group.
Thank you. Getting the community to trust the law enforcement members on our team, which is part of the question, will be fairly easy because the first thing we intend to do is introduce ourselves to the community, give our background, and they will know the work that we have done. I was the former creator of the People's Plan to dramatically reduce crime in Baltimore City. We've engaged the community. We've been to certain events. We've been involved on a regular basis. So I don't think that'll be that difficult once the team get to know it. The people get to know us. Most of the people on our team have a history of doing significant things in this city before even applying for this monitor contract. The other thing is, as the DOJ report said, as the mayor have said and others have said, getting us to this point of distrust has been an evolutionary process. It goes back a very long ways, and it's not going to change overnight. There's a biblical saying that you will know them by their deeds. The people learn from observation, participation, and demonstration. The last thing they learn from is a whole lot of conversation. So I can't convince them with words that there should be trust between them and the community. We're going to have to engage them. The police are going to have to demonstrate that they're there for the people, that they are part of the solution in this particular process, and then I think you build trust. But it is an evolutionary process, just like the deterioration of these relationships to where we have today with the DOJ report was an evolutionary process that didn't get better, it got worse.
And additionally, from an immigrants' rights perspective, it'll be really important to distinguish and separate the Baltimore Police Department from federal immigration and from that focus that federal immigration has. Right now, unfortunately, there is a lot of distrust in the Baltimore community among immigrants and refugees, which form a robust part of our community, and the police department because immigration is often grouped with the Baltimore Police Department. In the same vein, though, it's important for Baltimore to also distinguish itself as a harm reduction police department instead of a law enforcement police department, which the rest of the country has not, unfortunately, got on board with.
Thank you. I do have one follow-up question for the Powers Group. So with regard to how you will help BPD officers gain the trust. It sounds like engagement from an officer perspective is something that's important to your group, and that you both agree that it will take time. Can you speak more concretely about what your team is going to be doing to gain the trust of to help BPD gain the
Yeah,
trust?
a couple of things. DPD have already begun to put some things in place. I know that from a fact. I've observed them. I've been invited to observe some of the things that they put in place and so on and so forth. We will monitor that consistent with the consent decree to make sure it continues. I think we can provide significant technical assistance because members of our team have been extremely great at being able to bring together police in the community. They've been extremely great at being able to get rid of that divide between police and the community. So I think that the things that BPD are putting in place, the technical advice we can give, the input, the community engagement, as we said before, we're going to have satellite offices in the east and the west and the north and the south part of the city, and to demonstrate that. And then training is such a significant issue in the police department. You have a lot of young police officers coming into the police department now. We want to be a part of that process, giving technical advice so they do not see themselves as separate from the people,
you,
but a
Powers
part
team.
of the people.
Thank you. Venable?
Let me discuss, first of all, why you should have no concern about the law enforcement people on our team. Let me start with myself. First of all, I am not a law enforcement person. I have been a lawyer for 40 years, and the first 10 years of my practice, I was a criminal defense lawyer, which means I was on the other side of the police in some of the very type issues and cases that the consent decree is designed to address. In terms of the law enforcement members of my team, let me assure you that they are a different type of law enforcement person. If you look, and I beg you to look at their bios, look at their resumes. You will see that these are individuals, all to a person, who for a substantial part of their career believe firmly in constitutional policing reform. And what does that mean? That simply means this, that they understand that lawless law enforcement, that is bad policing, does not solve crime. In fact, it can make crime worse. And to a person, they understand that. And so in terms of trust, I don't think you should have any problem with that with our team. In terms of how we help the Baltimore Police Department, I think that the consent decree has got to be looked at as the foundation. Because what the community really wants is respect. And the consent decree creates an atmosphere that if it's followed, it should provide respect to the team and giving that to the community. So it's my view, and I firmly believe this, that once the police officers treat the community with respect, the community will treat the police with respect, and that's how we get a safer Baltimore.
So I have a follow-up question for Venable. It sounds like the record of the law enforcement officers that are on your team is something that is important to you, and giving the community the opportunity to take a look at their record on the issues is something that's important to you. Can you provide some more specific details about what you're going to be doing to overcome the distrust that may be present on your team?
We will reach out to the community because I think that is obviously the first step you've got to do. The community has got to meet our team. And if we are fortunate enough to be hired, come day one, we will be out in the street with the team. I live in Baltimore. I love this city. I've been here all my life. I will be here, and along with my team, we will get out to the community so that folks can meet our experts. And I think once you meet our experts, and you ought to read the bios as well, but once you meet our experts, you will understand that these are civil rights people. These are folks who in their DNA believe that lawless law enforcement is bad, that it's ineffective, and I think they will convey, in fact, I will say that I know they will convey that to the public.
Thank you, Venable. CNA?
Good evening again. The foundation of trust is based on police and community recognizing the value that one another brings to addressing issues within the community. And you start with creating an environment of transparency and accountability. opening the doors to the police department. For so long, law enforcement believed that what we know and what we've engaged in is a secret. It's not. The majority of what law enforcement does each and every day is take in information and give information. And we must be willing, the Baltimore Police Department must be willing to share that information in order for citizens to make conscious decisions about their safety. When you start talking about our team, we have a monitoring team that will ensure access to all citizens within Baltimore, allowing us to move about the city, to engage citizens where they are in order to bring opportunities for them to be able to comment on policies, help to shape training within the Baltimore Police Department. Every citizen should have an opportunity to see and experience and be a part of the training and policies that the police department puts out in order to better serve them. Routinely, we will look to address every corner of Baltimore as it relates. If you look at CNA's budget, 40% of our budget is dedicated toward community outreach. We recognize clearly that this consent decree is baked in the community having constant and daily involvement with the consent decree. Down from our SMEs, our Community Advisory Council, as well as the research and surveys that we will be looking to conduct throughout the city of Baltimore. Those are the things that will help build that trust.
With the second question, we'll start with the Powers team. This question is around bias, structural racism, and sexual orientation. Before I ask the question, I just want to check in with the room to make sure that everyone can hear me. Is this better? Okay. I'll speak with my outside voice tonight. What is your team's experience in identifying and addressing biased policing, specifically racial, ethnic, and gender bias? Please share examples of law enforcement agencies that realized a reduction in incidents of biased policing after receiving assistance from members of your team.
Thank you. Our team has significant experience in dealing with the bias issues. Commander Plummer in Las Vegas have had significant work in doing that. Not only did he reduce the bias and bring together the community, but he reduced crime by 40%, because that's a major part of this equation. We're in a city that's in crisis. So you deal with the bias issue, you deal with the policing issue, you deal with the crime issue, consistent with the consent decree. Deputy Chief Michael Blow, have had significant experience in reducing crime and dealing with bias issues in Prince George's County, not only as a deputy chief in the police department, but also as head of the school police after he retired from the police department. Myself, I've had significant input in that, so much so that the courts in the city of Philadelphia, actually when Chief Ramsey was there, reached out to me and asked me to review their policies on race and policing, to actually write it. The court brought me on board to write that report and submit that to the city of Philadelphia, because they believed that I had the expertise, the experience, and had a team of people that had demonstrated that in a number of ways in a number of agencies. Thirdly, I also was called before Congress by then Congresswoman Maxine Waters to talk about the race issues and bias and gender issues, even in the FBI. She had me testify before Congress and give solutions to deal with those particular issues as part of a consent decree that was eventually signed between the FBI and the black agents, and eventually the FBI and the Hispanic agents. I was significantly a part of that, which led the agency on for those. So we have practical experience. I've been asked by outside jurisdictions to use that practical experience, and we have significant experience on our team for dealing with those particular issues, and certainly dealing with those issues even in this city, in the programs and the proposals that we have put together, such as the People's Plan to dramatically reduce crime.
Thank you. I do have a follow-up question for you.
Yes, ma'am.
So in your response, we did hear you speak about experience around race bias, around ethnicity bias. Can you talk more about what folks on your team have done as it relates to bias policing for the LGBTQIA community?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. Commander Plummer has significantly dealt with that issue. Michael Blow has significantly dealt with that issue. John Ross All of these are police officials. You'll see them up here in the second part and the Q&A part have significantly dealt with that issue. More importantly, we also have behavioral scientists on our team. Obviously, we have Michelle Mendez, who is helping us deal with those particular issues. Our team have dealt with those issues, have a concrete history of dealing with those issues, and continue to deal with those issues even today. And you will hear directly from them and what they do, and they have more time than I have in terms of explaining that. But we are strong in those areas.
And specifically, I have represented immigrant LGBT individuals who have been victims of crimes on things such as U visas, as well as Violence Against Women Act.
Thank you. Exeter? I'm sorry, I'm going backwards. Venable? I had to mess up one time tonight, right? Venable?
Yes, thank you, Shantae. Many of the monitors on our team have direct monitoring experience. For example, in New Orleans, monitoring bias policing issues, especially issues involving the LGBTQ community. I have led efforts in that area, and so we'll be honored to talk more about that later. But also from a personal perspective, I, in 2001, with my police department in a city of 400,000 people, in a metropolitan area of 7.5 million people, created the state of Texas's first stop data reporting system. It was voluntary. It was innovative, so much so that by 2003, the entire state of Texas adopted our system as a statewide model, which also has served as a national model for reporting stop data. Other monitors, including Dr. John Lambert, have a lot of experience in this arena. Dr. Lambert, for example, worked with the New Jersey State Police in creating racial profile measures, and his measures that he helped the New Jersey State Police with ultimately were adopted by the DOJ. When he conducted the baseline study, he found that 4.2%, or that African American drivers and pedestrians were 4.2 times more likely to be stopped and searched than non-African Americans. But in the follow-up study, found that that number had been reduced to 2 times. He's done similar work in Kalamazoo, and also 2 of the members of our monitoring team quite recently have assisted the Maryland State Police with the same kind of work, revamping their racial profiling policies.
Thank you, Venable. CNA?
Again, like our other counterparts, CNA Group has extensive input and experience in dealing with racial bias in various police departments around the country. Not long ago, our managing director led an effort in the Las Vegas Police Department where they went out and reviewed police uses of force to include police shootings. And the startling realization was that there was considerable amount of bias within those particular cases. The analysis that was conducted, the information, the strategies that were put forth for the Las Vegas Police Department are something that has helped lead not only in the effort of reducing that bias, but also putting in great accountability measures to make sure that they can continue to see reductions in that particular area. CNA has conducted a number of collaborative reforms around the country with various police departments as it relates to bias policing. One of our deputy monitor was a part of that New Jersey State Police consent decree, whereby his focus was within the internal affairs area, dealing specifically with racial profiling, whereby they were able to revamp the way that citizen complaints alleging racial profiling were investigated, and how they were going to provide additional training to officers as it relates to making them aware of their own biases. And a great deal of effort had gone into the accountability of supervisors within that agency, because in order to really root out bias within police departments, there has to be a great amount of supervision associated with that. I myself has assisted the Meridian Police Department in dealing with racial bias issues
Thank you,
within its
CNA.
public school system
I
as
do
well.
have a follow-up question for you.
Okay.
So we heard you say a lot about your team's work around the lines of racial bias. Given what has happened in Baltimore and the surrounding communities, including Baltimore County, and what's happened around the country associated with gender bias policing, can you give some specific examples of what your team has done in that area?
Well, you only need to look at any one of the statistical data that has actually gone out. And if you look specifically at sexual assaults involving females, we have a member of our team that has extensive experience as it relates to reforming police departments' efforts as it relates to doing what's right and proper when it comes to sexual assaults involving women, whether it's within the city itself or whether it's on school campuses. I believe that we have to have greater efforts in addressing the issue of sexual assaults involving women.
Thank you. Exeter?
Thank you very much. I think first thing you have to do is acknowledge the fact that bias and structural racism exists. I mean, not just in a police department, but in our society at large. So the question then becomes, how do we deal with it? Now, in addition to all the areas that have already been dealt with, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, people with disabilities is another area that we have to be concerned about, and we have to be able to root it out and be able to deal with it. The Exeter 21st Century Policing team has a great deal of expertise in this particular area, primarily because we're fortunate enough to have as one of our team members, Professor Tracy Mears, Yale Law School, who has spent 2 decades working and writing about this very topic. I mean, when the Chicago Police Department reached out to start a new curriculum to deal with the issue of bias, who did they reach out to? They reached out to Professor Mears. I mean, that's the kind of talent and expertise, deep expertise, that the Exeter 21st Century Policing team brings to the table. But we also have to realize that identifying bias is more than just counting disparities. I mean, we have to also take a look at the perception of fairness in our communities. And that's something that we have expertise, again, in dealing with. I mean, we can come up with all the numbers we want. If people feel as if they're not getting a fair shake, they feel as if there's bias being directed toward them for whatever reason, that's a problem. And we have to be able to effectively deal with it. That means reaching out to the community, doing surveys, talking to officers. But just as importantly, don't take lightly the kinds of complaints we get from community about verbal abuse and various other types of infractions that historically have kind of been looked at as being not sustained, can't prove or disprove. You get enough, the people aren't just complaining for no reason. There's something going on. And one of the main problems we have in our business is a lack of respect that police officers show toward the citizens they serve.
Thank you, Exeter. Thank you. So for the third question, we'll start with Venable. That question is around accountability. The consent decree includes a number of measures designed to increase the transparency of the systems designed to hold BPD officers accountable for misconduct and strengthen civilian oversight over BPD. What is your track record in enhancing civilian oversight over law enforcement agencies, and in what way are you prepared to overcome obstacles that may be posed by Maryland's law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights or the collective bargaining agreement between the city and BPD? Venable?
Sure. Some of the characteristics that make police officers so effective at what they do, Chief Ramsey mentioned being a guardian or guardianship, also serve as cultural barriers to effective policing. Characteristics such as the police officer's suspicious nature, their cynicism, their conservative nature, police officers being clannish as well as being private. So police officers tend to be standoffish, and the police culture promotes a we or us versus them kind of an attitude. So our team members are in the weeds with the police. We have to develop that relationship, and we have to be able to communicate with the police officers. And so what One of the barriers that we have to overcome immediately is to demystify what this process of the consent decree involves. We have to help them understand what it really says and what it really means. And that this consent decree is an opportunity to not only enhance constitutional policing in the city of Baltimore, but it's an opportunity to enhance the safety of Baltimore police officers, that it's really designed to be a win-win. And through working with the leadership team of the agency, we're able to impact positive supervision and management. We're able to increase the supervisors and management capacity, and that bodes well for the cops. The training that's imparted through the consent decree process better prepares the officers to survive encounters, but also better prepares them to engage and embrace the community. There is a huge technology piece that cops everywhere I've been say is without the technology piece provided by the consent decree, they would not be as well off. And then the staffing assessment. So we help them to see that it's a win-win.
Thank you, Venable. I do have a follow-up question for you. So I think I heard you talk about the personality makeup of officers, and that communication is something that's going to be important in moving the city forward. Working together is going to be something important. In the next minute, can you share some specific ideas that you have about ways that you're prepared to overcome obstacles associated with LEOBOR and the collective bargaining agreement?
Certainly. Communicating with the officers on their turf where they are. We've got to go inside the stations and the station houses, but we also plan to visit the union houses and meet with union leaders and union members of the police department. We have to be open. Somebody earlier mentioned transparency. The transparency has to flow through the relationship with the police as well as the relationship with the community. We know from experience that if we can't get the cops on board, the consent decree cannot be successful. And so we have to have those internal relationships, and we do it best by communicating in the environments where the cops actually are. We develop that relationship of trust, and we're able to communicate the benefits of the consent decree that way.
Thank you, Venable. CNA?
You know, the questions surround civilians. In order for you truly to be able to, we talked earlier about the information sharing, and really for police and citizens to gather a better understanding of what's going on in the police department, there has to be civilian oversight in certain areas, especially when you start talking about these review boards, these police shooting boards. Citizens must play an active role and be given access to those boards in order to help make the right decision. We've worked with departments around the country, the Las Vegas Police Department, based on our technical assistant that now has a citizen advisory group that outnumbers the number of police officers that sits on that board that are actually reviewing police uses of force and police shootings. We've worked with the Philadelphia Police Department, helping them to align their police advisory commission with their police shooting review board, whereby they now have access and serve as a voting member on those particular boards. They're sharing more information with citizen groups as it relates to shootings. So these are the type of things that I believe that citizens have to demand, they have to expect, they have to look towards being a part of, and not being afraid to be a part of an advisory board that's sitting down reviewing uses of force, reviewing citizen complaints, reviewing police shootings. You having that opportunity brings a different perspective to those particular cases, a perspective that needs to be had in each one of those cases. So I believe with our work, the emphasis should continue to have more citizens involved in those type cases for oversight.
Thank you. Exeter?
Thank you. Accountability really lies at the heart of this consent decree. One can have the best policies, the best procedures, the best training, but if there isn't accountability, if there isn't the appropriate supervision in the field, all of that can be for naught. What we have tried to do with our team is assemble the best, to bring the best to Baltimore, to bring independence to Baltimore, to bring community to Baltimore. And there are 4 aspects of this that are really important. One is the monitoring, compliance monitoring itself. We believe we have the best. Reform. We believe that we have the best reform team that could be assembled. Crime fighting. Without crime fighting, if crime doesn't go down through this consent decree at the same time that there is constitutional policing, we're all going to be in trouble. We believe we have brought that here. We believe that we have the experts who can help with regard to accountability, and I'll let Chuck talk a little bit about how we've done that in other jurisdictions.
Well, in addition to that, obviously our experience in working with other cities is going to play a key role in knowing, what rocks to overturn, if you will, to know where to look to make sure that officers that may be engaging in misconduct, we're able to root them out and take appropriate action. But when you really talk to police officers and citizens, we have more in common than we think we do. Everybody wants a fair and impartial investigation that leads to the truth. That's something to build on. That's something to start with. And I think that's very important when it comes to accountability. Police have an enormous amount of power and authority. They need to be held accountable.
Thank you. Powers Group?
Thank you. First of all, the accountability issue, the consent decree is not a request. It is a binding contract. The city has signed on to it. The Department of Justice has signed on to it. So there can really be no excuses regarding the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights or other instruments. The fact of the matter is this has to happen, and the monitoring team has to make sure that it's happened. One of the things that I think the expertise on our team, the leadership of our team, and the leadership positions they've been in, and law enforcement at every roles have put them in a position to understand that there is too many excuses. Accountability to the public. The police are peacekeepers. Their job is to serve and protect the people. That's why they come on to the police department. Sir Robert Peel, the founder of modern policing, said the people are the police and the police are the people. So the accountability issue we will monitor consistent with the consent decree. We know there's a number of organizations, the NAACP, a number of other organizations, are leaders of a beautiful struggle, are already working on the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights. But in the meantime, the fact of the matter is that there has to be accountability from police officers, from first-line supervisors, which is significantly important because police officers coming out of the academy can be as young as 21. The brain of a male doesn't even mature to 26 and a female to 22. So if the training is not right and tight and you're giving these people the authority to remove another human being from existence solely based on their discretion, then you have to hold them accountable. Our team have put accountability measures in place in all the departments they've been involved in. They've held people accountable through their evaluations. The Police Officers' Bill of Rights does not stop you from evaluating a police officer who's not doing the right thing in the community in a way that leads to his termination if necessary. So those things are not obstacles. They just have to stop being excuses, and leadership
Thank you, Powers.
has to make sure those happen.
I do have a follow-up question for the Powers Group. So I think that I heard you say that the consent decree is non-voluntary in nature, and that accountability is something that's very important to your team. Can you speak more concretely about what the track record is of your team with regard to enhancing civilian oversight?
Yeah, listen, Deputy Commissioner Michael Blow, who will be up here, was a former Deputy Commissioner in Prince George's County, was under consent decree. First of all, our team have significant monitoring experience. They've either participated in the monitoring process on one side or the other. They have significant experience with monitoring organizations in the federal government, with Susan Blow and so on and so forth. And they implemented those accountability systems, those transparency systems, those change systems without an excuse, without saying, they understood that there may be some difficult times, difficult situations, and difficult people, but it's not an option. This is the purpose of policing. That has to be done. And so all of these leaders of these police organizations have absolutely and unequivocally overcome those particular obstacles, put accountability in place, and put transparency in place, transparency for the community. The community and the police are in this together, and I say again that this is not an option. They have to be overcome. The consent decree is signed, it's in place. The monitors have to make sure that it happened,
Powers
and
Group.
there's no excuses.
Thank you.
Accountability is important.
For question number 4, we'll be starting with CNA. That question is around community engagement. Beyond reports, data collection, and community meetings, how will your designated community liaison interact regularly with Baltimore residents? How does your team plan to involve and engage the community in a way that accounts for the uniqueness of the challenges Baltimore faces, including reaching people most impacted by BPD's law enforcement activities? How will your team ensure transparency into your activities and community influence on the reform process?
Thank you. Let me first say that central to Coppin State's mission is community engagement. And so we will actively engage Baltimore residents in a variety of ways. One of the first things that we'll do is to establish a community council. And that's very important because we want to identify 6 to 8 organizations throughout the city that work with diverse populations that have established trust already based on the work that they're doing in those communities that are impacted. We also plan to have 9 meetings a month throughout the city. Those meetings are critical because it provides a forum for residents to be able to come to share their fears and their hopes and their concerns about the progress of the consent decree. And it also affords them the opportunity to participate as a facilitator and to support the process. Another thing that we hope to do is to work with the community so that they can connect with us on a personal level. You can't microwave trust. It takes time to build trust. And so we'll establish an office with office hours so that community residents can drop in who may not want to share at the forum, who may want to speak to us one-on-one, and to talk to us about their thoughts and ideas in regards to the progress of the consent decree. We plan to reach out to youth organizations, to returning citizens, to seniors, and we also plan to have modalities that are available for individuals who may work, individuals who may not be able to come out to the meetings. So we'll look at using our website so that we can have virtual tools to be able to connect with the youth, to connect with those individuals who may not be able to come to the forum for whatever the reason may be. Also, we're going to compensate individuals who participate. So we're going to show and make an investment in those individuals who
CNA.
are given their time. Thank you.
Exeter?
Thank you. We believe community engagement is central to the process, but not just engagement, participation, community participation. We want this to be a collaborative effort, fully collaborative, between ourselves and the community. In order to do that, Jessica Drake, a member of our team, who you'll have an opportunity to hear from in a little while, has set up the Monitoring Team Advisory Board. To date, there are 15 organizations which have agreed to participate. Membership is still open. We intend to engage extensively with that group on a daily basis, to listen to that group, and hopefully that group, through its member or its organization's members, will be the grassroots which bring up the information that we need to have in order to have the community meaningfully participate in the process. We too will be here on the ground. We plan to be here every weekday for at least the first 6 months of the consent decree. We will have office hours. We will make sure that the community is engaged. Chuck?
Very quickly, a couple quick examples. In DC, we had, as part of our training for problem solving, when we went to a community policing model, joint problem solving. Officers that worked in a particular area had training at the same time as the residents of the training. They did it jointly. In Philadelphia, there was a requirement that action plans be developed with the community to deal with chronic crime and disorder problems. Again, jointly. You have to work together. There needs to be more than just engagement. There needs to be actual participation. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question for Exeter. So I think that I heard you say that a variety of input sources around community engagement and togetherness around that engagement is important to your group. Can you speak more specifically about how your team will ensure transparency into your activities?
I think the transparency will come through what I described just a little while ago. There will be continual interaction with the community through the MTAB, as we call it, the Monitoring Team Advisory Board. We will be advising them on what we are doing, how the consent decree is progressing. We will answer the questions that they have. This process should be completely transparent, not only to the parties, but to the community as well. We talk sometimes about this not being monitoring by ambush. We mean that. Everybody will understand exactly what is expected of the Baltimore Police Department in terms of meeting their obligations under the consent decree, and most of all, the community will understand exactly what those obligations are.
Thank you. Powers Group?
Sorry. Thank you. As we indicated before, we intend to have satellite offices throughout the city. And as we also indicated, as monitor, I was born, reared, and I live here in the city. When I walk out the door in the morning, I will be accessible to the people. Prior to this monitoring process, this is not a matter of getting a contract. This is a significant event that we have passion for, to change the life chances of the people in Baltimore City, to bring police and the community together, because constitutional policing and reducing crime are not mutually exclusive. They can work together. We intend to engage the community every single day. And even after this monitoring process is over with, even after Baltimore City Police Department is completely in compliance, I will still be in this city. My children are here. My grandchildren are here, city residents. So we will engage them every day in every way in the way that we already have. We've already reached out to community organizations and community groups. They will be a part of our team. They already know that. We will compensate them. That's a non-issue, because more importantly than compensation, even though that is important to them, they want a change in the system. They don't want to be paid off or bought in or bought out. They want to see significant change. We've brought people on board like Dr. Andre Bunley, the people in the education system, leaders of a beautiful struggle, that will be intimately involved in creating the surveys. We will be walking up and down Pennsylvania Avenue, going to the social clubs and the social meetings on a daily basis. That's what monitoring is about. Not monitoring here and there, but on a consistent basis.
And additionally, all of us matter in this city, but perhaps the one group that matters the most is the youth. And we have already engaged in this spectrum. We have already been advising the Baltimore Police Department training commander in the Youth Police Initiative. And Latino young men.
Thank you, Powers Group.
And young black men all share this issue.
Thank you, Powers Group.
Thank you.
Venable?
Community engagement is critical, I repeat, critical to the success of the consent. It's critical to the success of the, don't kill me, to the success of the consent decree. I don't care how well written the consent decree may be. I don't really care how well the police department performs in complying with the consent decree. Unless there is community buy-in, this will be a waste of time. We have to have community buy-in. So how do we propose to do that? Well, we, like all the other teams, will obviously have an office with regular hours. We will have a website. And all of those things are important. But our team takes the view that we should not put the onus on the community. It should not be their obligation to come to us. It's nice if they do, and we would love it if they do, and if they come, we'll certainly take their information. But it is our obligation as monitors to reach out to the community. So the community liaison person, the primary obligation is to go out and to introduce our team to the leaders in the community. And as we all know, and I live in Baltimore, I've lived here my entire life. I'll be here 24/7. I think I know how it works. You have to meet the leaders in the community, and the activist groups. And if you do that, it'll snowball. You'll meet more groups, and our position is to get out and to meet as many people as we can. Now, we take information from those folks. And what do we do with that information? Well, we will collect it the same way we would any other data. And the way we show transparency is to, when we do our findings in our report, we will reflect in our report where we have gotten information from a particular group and how we have used it.
Thank you, Venable. For our final question, we'll be starting with Exeter. That question is around diversion. Please explain your team's experience in creating and implementing policies and programs that reduce the interaction of vulnerable persons with police, and what assistance you can provide the city and BPD to divert people from police involvement.
Thank you very much. Part of it is mindset. In my opinion, and in our team's opinion, the role of police is to help starve the criminal justice system, not continually feed it. That's where diversion comes in. That's where referral comes in. How can we keep people out of the system? A system that was not designed to make you better in the end result. It's designed to punish, and we need to understand that, and many people don't need to get caught up in that. One good example, concrete example, one of our team members, Kevin Bethel, was one of my deputy commissioners. He came to me one day and said, "Boss, we got a problem. We're locking up too many kids in our schools." He had looked at the data. There was no beef, no complaint or anything like that, but he saw something, and he came to me with a solution. Working with the school district, working with the DA's office, working with the courts, came up with a diversion program that in this first year cut the number of arrests in our schools by half. By half. I mean, that's the kind of thing we need to do. Another source of tension with police and community is enforcement of quality of life type things, right? You're in a challenged community, you give somebody a ticket for $25, where are they going to get there's a choice between paying a ticket and maybe buying food for the kids or school supplies for the kids. What's wrong with a warning? What's wrong with exposing people to different resources within city government that can maybe help them in many ways? We've got to find ways to keep people out of the system and use the criminal justice system for those that truly pose a threat and a danger to society. That's where they belong, not everybody else.
Thank you. I have a follow-up question for Exeter, please. So you spoke about youth diversion programs and procedures that have been implemented by members of your team. Can you speak more specifically about your team's experience in creating any policies or programs with folks that have mental health issues, given that we see that as a prominent problem in Baltimore?
Crisis intervention team training is something that departments across the country is doing. One of the foremost experts, unfortunately not on our team, is Randy sitting over there. I don't want to give him too much credit, but everybody is, I mean, it is very, very important. And who's the first to see an individual like that? The cops. And you have to be also proactive, because if we really know the people on our beat that we serve, you also know the ones where you get the repeat calls, people that have had some issues, you know, stop by and check on them. Hey, you know, you're taking your medication, you know, what's going on with you, you know, provide that kind of support. I mean, we have a huge population of people that have mental illness that is going untreated. Police need to know how to de-escalate situations, how to properly respond, identify it right away, and that's something that we do have a great deal of expertise, because all of us have had experience in running police departments, helping to reform police departments, and CIT training is a critical component of that.
Thank you. Powers Group?
Thank you. Again, members of our team, the reason they were selected on this team is because their expertise in a number of areas, including this particular area, and many of them have already implemented diversion programs that are working tremendously well. But let me also say this, in any monitoring process or any process in which you're monitoring, you have to do a baseline evaluation. The fact of the matter is, during the course of this process, we had the opportunity to sit with the Baltimore City Police Department, Pam Davis as their trainer, and they've already begun to implement many things in crisis intervention and training. They brought in other people and so on and so forth. And so we're going to monitor that. They've already been moving towards some of the items on the consent decree. And as I said, this is an evolutionary process, so it will take time. We want to monitor that to add to that, to add our specific experience to what they've already are doing and what they've already done. I want to make this abundantly clear. Besides the information in the DOJ investigation about the Baltimore City Police Department, there's been a significant desire to recruit individuals from the city to bring other individuals in the police department, to have other people advise the police department to increase these diversion programs, to increase de-escalation programs and training and de-escalation and monitoring that, because a lot of the use of force situations become use of force situations after a police officer go too far. In other words, he could have backed down, could have walked away, could have understood the community before that. Well, BPD have already begun to implement that. We will monitor that. We have great technical assistance that can help them with de-escalation measures and then diversion measures, because if you never have to get to that point of arresting someone, then that's the best case scenario. Not just to get them probation before judgment, but to keep them from getting a record at all. That's diversion. The best way to help our youth in the criminal justice system is to let them not get involved with it at all.
Venable?
Yes, my colleague quoted Sir Robert Peel a few minutes ago, and I also would like to remind us that Sir Robert Peel also said that to the extent we obtain voluntary compliance lessens the need to use force. And so that applies both inside and outside the agencies. Our team is really fortunate to have significant experience in creating and implementing policies and programs that enhance positive outcomes while reducing the negative interactions between vulnerable individuals and the police. We have experience working in this field. In fact, Dr. Randy DuPont, as Chief indicated earlier, is one of 3 clinical psychologists on our team. And he'll take primary responsibility for diversion programs amongst our team. Now, Dr. DuPont is a clinical psychologist and a professor of criminal justice. He's one of the nation's leading experts in diversion strategies and de-escalation strategies. He was honored by NAMI and by the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, Law Enforcement News, as their National Person of the Year for changing the way law enforcement interacts with vulnerable populations, such as individuals who are struggling, Shante, with mental illness. Now, Dr. DuPont helped develop a strategy and a model that is now in over 3,000 cities in the United States. And so here are some of the elements of what we propose to do as we apply trauma-informed approaches. We propose to implement a strategy that emphasizes meaningful community participation throughout the diversion process, a strong relationship with healthcare and social services, specialized knowledge about vulnerable individuals, and safety for everyone.
Thank you, Venable. CNA?
I hope them holding the mic's not going into our time, but.
It is not.
Thank you. Again, I think diversion is a critical issue for any city, and it's a joint responsibility. Whether we talk about juvenile diversion, whether we talk about mental health, is something that must occur. You know, I come from a state, North Carolina. I served as chief of police for 8 years. North Carolina is only one of 2 states in the country that considers a 16 and 17-year-old an adult, whereby a 16-year-old is arrested. That record stays with them for the rest of their lives. So one of the things that I was out on the forefront with is trying, number one, to have that law changed, and I believe that we're this close to having that law changed. But more importantly, in the meantime, we've established diversion programs within the city of Charlotte that allows us to defer a kid out of the criminal justice system. We've deferred several hundred kids out of the criminal justice system that didn't need to receive a criminal record. That led to an opportunity to work with the North Carolina Governor's Crime Commission and try to take that strategy, not just within police departments, but within the criminal justice system, within the social service arena as well, whereby there's far too many minority kids that are in foster homes, that are in on probation, that are in juvenile detention facilities, unless you look to make a concerted effort to divert them out of that particular system. Once they get into that system, we believe that the services that are there, not only in North Carolina, but in several other cities, are not what it needs for a juvenile to really make a vibrant way of life for themselves. So I believe that we've been intimately involved in diversion. One of our other deputy monitors led the Illinois project that, again, diverted kids outside of the criminal justice system and provided them opportunities, jobs, skills, other life-challenging
Thank you so much,
experiences
CNA.
to make them successful. Thank you.
I have one last follow-up question.
Yes, ma'am.
And it's for CNA. So you spoke about the vulnerability of our youth and programming that members of your team have put in place. Also in the category of vulnerable persons are the elderly and the disabled. Can you speak more about any policies or programs that your team has experience in developing in that area?
Well, again, I think that the police in partnerships with communities must bear that responsibility for our juveniles as well as our senior citizens, that we have to be more conscious of the environment that they're in, what their needs are, and be able to provide more opportunities for them. Johnny?
I was going to say it's also important to be cognizant of the resources and services that are available within the community, be it tapping into adult services resources on a community-based level, but it's making sure that you have a web and a network of partners, be it disabilities, accessibility, whatever that specific need is, it's important to be able to identify viable, committed, and trusted partners to provide the service to them.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for your responses to the pre-submitted questions. As we transition to the second half of the forum, we're going to ask all monitor teams except for Exeter to leave the stage to our left, and we'll ask the balance of the Exeter team to enter the stage on the right. If you have questions, we'll ask you to raise your hand and wait for a microphone to come to you before you begin speaking so that everyone can hear your question. To allow for maximum participation, we'll be limiting the asking of the questions to 1 minute per person, and we'll limit the number of questions to 1 per person. If there are any Spanish-speaking members of the audience that has questions, we would ask that those Spanish-speaking persons speak your question in Spanish and let us know if you need an interpreter. We have one present for you. The monitoring candidates will have 3 minutes each to respond to your questions. If you have a question for a particular monitor candidate that doesn't get answered during their allotted 20-minute response time, remember that you'll have time at the end of the session tonight to directly engage with those monitors. Erica Bridgeford, who is to my right, will be serving as my co-moderator for this half of the forum. Erica?
All right, so who has a question for Exeter? There was also a hand in the back that went up.
You got it. So there's a lot of experience in the criminal justice field and the law field here. You can't possibly work in the criminal justice field and don't see the racial disparities in America. So in America, statistically, African Americans make up 13.5% of the population. But if you look at prison population, we make up almost 50%. I used to work in correction. I used to be a correctional officer. And being a correctional officer in Baltimore City, you would think only black men broke the law. But that's not true. Every race, Caucasian, Latinos, whites, blacks, whatever, everyone breaks the law. What are we going to do to change this extreme unbalancement of African American men and women populating these institutions like we the only ones that breaks the law. Every race use drugs. Every race steals. Every race steals cars. Whatever crime you can think of, every race does that. I want to know, what can we do to change that, to make this more fairly of a system?
Okay, so I'm just gonna try to grab what I heard you saying in there and then see if I can get your question. So I was hearing that you feel really outraged about what you perceive as the imbalance and how many African-American men there are in the general population and comparing that to how many are in prison. And that also you're looking for fairness in the way black men are treated in general by the criminal justice system. And you're asking, so specifically your question to this team is, what is it that they can do to make sure that that fairness happens as it relates to how police deal with black men? Is that right? Okay.
Okay, I can start. My name's Tracy Mears. I'm a law professor. I teach at Yale. I used to teach at the University of Chicago before that, and I've spent 20 years over that, actually, in my career, studying the issues that you just spoke about, how communities, urban communities, experience crime in their neighborhoods, but also the law enforcement strategies to address that. And I think one of the things that we've talked about today is the importance of understanding not just the numbers that you were talking about, but the ways in which people understand the fairness of their relationships with authorities, and that it's about how those interactions take place are actually more important than the outcomes. One incredibly important thing I know from my research, and I've been able to work with departments across the country to do, is to think about how agencies work together with communities to assess the priorities of what they care about. So as you said, if your focus is on drug law enforcement, say, as opposed to other things that the community might care much more about, you are going to hopefully have many, many fewer people involved in the system in the first place, but you'll also have a different distribution of people who are being involved in the system. I think that's one thing to say, and I'm sure other members of the team who've directly been involved in this can add to it.
Yes, my name is Roberto Villasenor. I'm retired chief of police from Tucson, Arizona, and I was a member of President Obama's task force. We dealt with a lot of the issues that you're talking about, but we did it, I'm sorry, I apologize. We dealt with the issues that you're talking about at the juvenile area. As Commissioner Ramsey was talking about, one of his assistant chiefs talked about what they were doing there. We also saw the same thing. In fact, we participated in a study with the Burns Group about disproportionate level of minorities in the juvenile justice system. And so we helped develop a system, a screening system at juvenile court that we trained our officers to work in. And you're right, people from every ethnic background commit crime. But why was it that the juveniles of color were by far being detained much longer than others? And so we helped develop a questionnaire which looked at different aspects and saying, if these conditions were met, then this person's eligible for release and not necessarily getting into the system. So there's mechanisms that can be put in place that help directly affect what you're talking about, and I agree, it is a problem.
I also want to add that several members of our team are addressing that issue head-on nationally with the DOJ, with Congress, with the Senate. We're members of Law Enforcement Leaders to Reduce Crime and Incarceration, which is a national group. It's got about 300 police leaders, and not just...
Thank you very much. Sorry, we were going in for the mic together. There was a slight collision there. We want to maximize audience participation, and so that's why we're monitoring the time so closely. Is there another question for Exeter? Oh,
There were hands back there.
Yes, my question is about accountability for the police. I just want to make sure, especially with the Bill of Rights, it seems like the Baltimore City Police, I don't know if it's a law, that they don't go to jail for crimes. It's like they can retire, they can resign, but they take all of the pensions. So I want to know what your organization have done to recommend charges for police that seem to be able to retire and take out pensions that the citizens have to pay for. And I want to make sure that we look into the Bill of Rights to make sure whatever needs to be changed as far as allowing them to have 10 days to make up their story and bring that to the police force, and they have all these other perks that they have, that if they were held accountable and go to jail like every other criminal, only for crimes, that they be held accountable for that. They
10
go to jail.
seconds.
Well, I mean, first of all, there is no law that exists that prevents police officers from being jailed if they commit a crime. I think it's also important to note that the Police Officers' Bill of Rights, whereas none of us may agree with it, is law. So it's going to take a whole different process in order to change that. That's not something that a monitoring team can actually do. The one thing we can do, however, is make sure that the investigations that are taking place whenever an officer is accused of any form of misconduct is a thorough, complete, fair investigation that arrives at a conclusion based on the facts that exist. And that's something that we can do, and that's something that we will be spending an awful lot of time monitoring just to make sure that that is done. If we present the right case, if it is something of a criminal nature that needs to be presented to the state's attorney, and we need to have a conversation with the state's attorney if they're seeing any deficiencies in some of these cases that are being given to them, what are those deficiencies and how do we correct that so that she has something to work with? If it in fact calls for that sort of thing, a lot of the cases that we'll be dealing with, of course, are more administrative in nature that deal with punishment and suspensions as opposed to criminal. But if it rises to a criminal level, we need to make sure we put together as strong a case as possible.
Okay, anybody else have a question? He told you to wait. Okay.
Hi, my name is Doug Colbert. I teach at Maryland Law School. You know, all of the presentations have really been excellent, and it's really difficult, I think, for most people to really know where your priorities lie. So I guess my question is that as a monitor, you have competing interests. You have interests of the police, you have interests of the community that's most affected by policing and see the wrongful conduct that takes place. You have, of course, the mayor of our city. So at the end of the day, who gets your number one priority in terms of where you're trying to get satisfaction? And you can't say everyone. You have to choose one. And what I really would like you to do is to think about the presentations that you made during the vetting process. Where did you begin with? Did you begin with the community, the police, the mayor? You know, so we have an idea of where
10 seconds.
you're going to be most satisfied.
So you had two questions in there, but I think your main question is, whose interests will this monitoring team prioritize, the police, the community, or the mayor?
Well, listen, whether we want to acknowledge it or not, we're in this boat together, and it'll either sink or swim, one or the other. So it's not an either-or proposition. It is just not. We have one priority, and that is to make Baltimore a safer city and to give you the police department that you deserve, which is the very best there is. And whatever we have to do to make that happen is what we're willing to do, and we have the collective expertise to make that happen, and we've got a demonstrated track record to make that happen. Now, we've got a consent decree that has 510 paragraphs that we've got to deal with. We do have to set some priorities. But at the end, what we want is something that all parties can agree is in the best interest of this city of Baltimore, its residents, its visitors, its other stakeholders. I mean, that's the only way to approach this, in my opinion.
Anybody else want to answer? Okay, next question from the audience. We're back there with Lamont Trey.
Hey, my name is Ava Pipitone. I'm the Executive Director of the Baltimore Transgender Alliance. And my question is first, two questions. First about
Well,
history.
you get one, so I'm going to pause
I'll
you
do my
right
best
there
to
and
make
tell
it
you to
work.
ask one. Pick one.
So in the context of past experience of the Extra team, I want to talk a little bit about your experiences working with the LGBT community. And there was a slide earlier about vulnerable populations. So I'm specifically concerned with populations engaged in sex work and the transgender community. So I know that our population is vulnerable, and I know that when the DOJ came to us, we have stories of death at the hands of police in our community. And when those stories come forward and there's no protection, those stories are not, we leave the table if you can't protect us. So I want to know a little bit about how you're going to get that buy-in from my community and other communities like mine.
Oh, you want some clarification?
No,
You
we're
got
good.
it? Okay.
Yeah, right.
Okay. A few things in there. So specifically, you're looking, it sounds like you're saying that your experience is understanding that particularly sex workers have had a mistrustful relationship with the police department, right? That when they tell their stories, looking for protection around what happens after they tell their stories. And so specifically, you're looking for how this team will ensure that there'll be protection, that if people are honest and transparent about what their stories are, that there'll be protection around that. Is that right? And how to get buy-in from those people who already feel mistrustful because of their past experience. So how will your team get buy-in?
My name is Nola Joyce, and first of all, I want to thank you for the question, and thank you for standing up. So I work both in Washington, D.C. and in Philadelphia, and I want to share examples from both of those cities to address your issue. In Washington, D.C., under Chief Ramsey, we established a gay and lesbian liaison unit. Harvard University recognized that unit in their excellence in government. That unit, small unit, but its role was to make those kinds of connections. And when there was a crime against a vulnerable population, individuals in that vulnerable population, it was that unit who went out, responded, and helped guide the investigation, worked with the detectives, and trust and began to get built. And I think that relationship still exists between the police in DC and the gay, lesbian, transgender population. In Philadelphia, established a advisory group from that community, just like every other community. We drafted a policy around how the police will address and handle transgender issues when there's an encounter. We shared that draft with that community. They made comments on it, very good comments, comments that we included and added on it. It became a model policy, not just for Philadelphia, but for the country. And so I think what we bring is A, a recognition of the issues that you've described, and B, some real concrete examples and technical assistance that we can bring to Baltimore to help address the issues you raised.
And just to add one quick thing, with our training of our new police officers, we actually have representatives from the LGBTQ community come in and conduct classes in the academy. Because what we have found is that the one group within that special population that is least understood is the transgender community. And so we definitely need a lot of work in that area to help people better understand. And as Nola mentioned, even as much as, you know, having a directive, how do you refer to people that are part of the transgender community? All those kinds of things are very, very important in terms of establishing trust within that community and respect for people within that community.
And if I could add, Ava, you yourself, I'm Jessica Drake, and I'm a Baltimore citizen, and I've worked in this city for a long time, and I've lived here for 24 years. You yourself and your organization have done some outstanding things in the last several months to make headway in this city for the rights of the transgender community, as well as LGBTQ+. And we hope you'll partner with us to help that move forward.
So this team has 2 more minutes, so if there's one question, they'll have 2 minutes to answer it.
Yeah. You ready? Okay. So my name is Robin Wood. I am a lawyer here in town and a Baltimore resident. And I want to thank you all of you who are here participating in this process. I've got a question less about sort of values, I guess, in a way, but more about sort of mechanics, like who's going to be on the ground among your teams. There's a lot of expertise across the board there. From a lot of places. And so who will be on the ground doing the work? How does that really play out?
we're all going to be on the ground. And one of the things we have to do is establish a schedule so that we have people on the ground to deal with particular issues. For example, I'm in Philly. I'm an hour train ride away. We're going to make sure that we have a schedule that's going to be made public, and exactly who's going to be on the ground and what it is we're going to be doing while we're on the ground, both in terms of what we're doing internally with the police department as well as externally with the community. But we're going to have a very strong presence here, and the community's not going to. It's not going to have to come to us. We plan on coming out to the community.
I think it's important to recognize, to your question, I'm Matthew Barge, I'm the monitor of the consent decree in Cleveland, Ohio. I think it's important to understand that the monitoring team, one of the monitoring team's most important roles is as facilitators, setting an agenda so that the community, the police, everyone in the city can talk about the same issues at the same time. And that
Thank
does.
you, Exeter.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll ask the Exeter team members to exit the stage to my right, and we'll have the Powers team enter the stage to my left.
So who's asking a question right now to the Powers group?
My name is Cynthia Bryant Pitts, and I am a part of the faith-based community here in Baltimore, Maryland. My concern is, and it's for all of the teams, if at the end of the day we hope to see a more just and safe community, is there a process where all of the stakeholders can be engaged in shaping what that will be, arriving at common ground, and shaping what that would be? Or does this consent decree only monitor? Is there planning? Will there be a way of engaging all of the stakeholders? Do you have experience with that process?
Absolutely. The monitoring process, obviously there's specific duties consistent with the consent decree and the monitoring process to monitor the agreement between the Department of Justice and Baltimore City. We report to the judge about how well they are achieving that progress. But the only way we're going to know how well they're achieving that progress is consistent community engagement, certainly with the faith-based community. Part of our satellite offices will be in certain churches, and we will be in the churches and in the schools so that we can get your input, not only in terms of monitoring the climate, but also what do you think we should be looking at that we're not looking at? Because despite all the areas that the DOJ looked at in their investigation, despite what BPD have recognized as maybe weaknesses and things that they can get better at, the best people who recognize this are the people in the communities. And so you are a significant part of the monitoring process. I think those of you who participated in the first meeting with the judge saw how important the community was in that particular process. We have experience in that. As I mentioned earlier, very quickly, we put together years ago the People's Plan to dramatically reduce crime in Baltimore. We went to every single community because we know that unless the people see themselves invested in that plan or in that change, they will not participate. People, and especially in the community most affected, as the DOJ indicated in their report by this, are tired of paternalistic and condescending relationships with other people who know what's best for the community. They want to be intimately involved in the solutions for their community because that's the only way that they can be sustained long term. The consent decree allows for the monitors to provide technical assistance. That technical assistance, a large part of that, besides our expertise, we're known, we have expertise, a large part of that expertise will come from you because you are the purpose for the consent decree between Baltimore City and the department. You are at the center of that. And I think the court have said that, the consent decree said that, DOJ say that, and certainly as a monitoring team, we will make sure of that. I will guarantee you that 100%.
Okay, next question from the audience.
Okay. All right. The question I have for really every team is about lead poisoning. It's a mass crisis in Baltimore City. Thousands, tens of thousands of our people have been affected. I haven't heard anybody talk about that. So what would you do about that? I also want to talk about Chief Ramsey.
Wait, I gotta pause you. You can only
Chief
get
Ramsey,
one. You can only get one question,
in
sir.
Philadelphia and DC, you've had some serious issues. You mass arrested 400 people during the World
So
Bank
you gotta
IMF
pick which
protest.
question you want them to answer.
So I
You can
would
only
like
an-
for,
you can
well,
only
the
get
question
one.
I had earlier was about Charles Ramsey, and I would like for him to answer to everybody after the meeting about why he arrested all those people during DC protests in 2002.
Thank you, sir. Just so that we're checking in to make sure that the question that you directed to those that are on the stage gets answered. So sounds like feeling worried and concerned about what the health of the city looks like as it relates to potential lead poisoning and lead pipes, and asking this specific candidate group what they'll be able to do about that. So given that this is a team on the stage, we'll allow this team to address it, and other teams that come up later can choose to address it, and you have the opportunity then to obviously engage with Exeter after. Thank you.
This is the lead.
Yes.
Okay. The lead issue is a significant issue. This consulting group, well, you know, this team actually filed the injunction that had the water fountains turned off in all of the school system after testing by a parent that indicated that some of the water was 100 parts per billion, which was causing permanent brain damage, and we know all the other effects of lead. I just want to also give credit, though, because the DOJ report and the city have recognized that. They say in the report about the social, economic, and the other issues that are outside of policing that are affecting what we're seeing in this particular city. So to an extent, we've already began to address that. Again, the water fountains have been turned off since 2001. On that issue, we are, again, though, monitors of a consent decree between DOJ and the city of Baltimore. We will add technical advice, and we've already done some things to let you know prior to this even being offered. Prior to this monitoring job, we were already working using our expertise to help resolve some of the issues that we believe was dramatically leading to crime in Baltimore City that others weren't addressing.
Also, what's important to your question is the results from that of mental health issues with many of our young people and older in the city. Freddie Gray was one of those, as a matter of fact. One of the things that we can ensure, because of our relationship and work and the monitoring and the advice that we're going to be giving to the police department, is to have education of these police officers regarding these mental health issues of our young people that result from this lead paint poisoning and other issues. Critical incident training, de-escalation is important. They've already begun the process in Baltimore City. We will monitor it, and a big part of that is the work that we'll do in the community to see how that's working. Is the education taking hold? Are you seeing it as a result in interactions with the police officers? So that's why it's important to be on the ground 24/7 in all of these wonderful neighborhoods: Poplar Grove, White Lock, East Baltimore, West Baltimore, Southwest Baltimore, and we know those neighborhoods.
Thank you. Next question from the audience.
Hi, thank you for being here tonight. I'm very appreciative that you have an immigration attorney on your team here, and I hope that the other teams do have that. My interest is in the immigration community, and I have not heard anyone mention, other than you have, how you will implement the immigration community, immigrants, refugees, asylum seekers, and also the undocumented, and how you will connect with them and involve them in the monitoring and involve them in engagement in training, as well as you have done with the LGBT community. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. So the immigrant community and the refugee community in Baltimore, we know more or less where they're located. So knowing where the folks are located is number one. And then knowing where the stakeholders are and being connected to those stakeholders is super important. We've got individuals here from Casa de Maryland who are on the ground. We have LIRS, which is Lutheran Immigration Refugee Services. We have World Relief. We have Catholic Charities Esperanza Center. There are some really great stakeholders in Baltimore City that we are going to be working through, and I have extensive connections with them. I have worked all my life in nonprofits. And I'm currently working at the Public Defender's Office. That's my satellite office, even though my office is based in Silver Spring. But I have been in immigrants' rights in the state of Maryland since 2005. And prior to that, before I was an attorney, I was a legal assistant working specifically with detained individuals, many of whom, by the way, were transgender, back to the question previously, and who were detained and who didn't get the proper services. So having those stakeholders already connected to us is number one. Knowing where the community is located is number two. And then how do we get the police to be involved, to be engaged more with this community? Well, I think it's really important to, as I mentioned before on the prior panel, to help the community realize that the Baltimore Police Department is not the same as Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And granted, Immigration and Customs Enforcement isn't making that easy for Baltimore police, but Baltimore police can affirmatively do things to distinguish themselves, such as being part of Know Your Rights presentations and coming to local activities and local events in Baltimore City so they can show the real face of Baltimore City Police Department. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question from the audience.
So a lot of what you've talked about proposing to do to implement the consent decree are part of just national trends in better policing and better police reform, but there are a couple things that are standing in the way, I think, of Baltimore City and Maryland doing better in particular, and you've mentioned them with the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. Specifically, we have one of the strongest in the country, I think the second strongest. And also there are some limitations to our Civilian Review Board right now under its statute. They can't cover Fourth Amendment violations like illegal search and seizure, and they only have recommendatory power to IAD. They don't have the ability to directly implement disciplinary action on police. Will you publicly support campaigns for legislative reform on those issues so that we can continue to have more
10
effective
seconds.
civilian oversight once there is no longer an independent monitor here?
Again, I just want to make it perfectly clear, and I think it's clear what our job is as monitors. The consent decree, the agreement between the Department of Justice and Baltimore City have already been signed. We're to monitor that process and provide technical assistance. If during the course of monitoring that process and providing technical assistance, those are one of those issues, and we do believe that is an issue that can help bridge the gap between the police and the community, that can dramatically reduce crime, increase life chances, help everyone in the city. That is what we will recommend based on our technical advice to the city. We are not the Baltimore City Police Department. We are monitors in this particular process that have significant experience and expertise that can provide that assistance, not only to them, provide that assistance, but not only provide that assistance, but report those concerns as we engage the community and the stakeholders to the judge for his guidance in this particular process to make sure it fits in the confines of the consent decree and our monitoring positions.
Somebody want to add? I have something else.
And also, that's why it's so important that as part of the monitoring process, that the supervision and training aspects have very close monitoring. Because the LEOBR kicks in when folks have gotten themselves into situations they had no business getting into. And so it's very important that along with all of the things that are going on, that we have a very active role in ensuring that the policies, procedures, and training that the department has begun to reform now, not only are we looking at those, but we're also looking at things that are going to happen in the future, so that the goal is to make sure that we significantly reduce or eradicate the amount of officers that are finding themselves in need of the LEOBR for things that they have done intentionally. Oh, and by the way, I'm sorry, Deputy Chief Michael Blow retired from the Prince George's County Police Department.
And additionally, the alternative hearing board clause, that's a big issue, right? But that is a fight that's going to happen in Annapolis. That's just how it is. It has to happen in Annapolis. What we could do is just be independent advocates in Annapolis, but as Dr. Power said, we have to also keep in mind what the purpose is of us. But we can be there in Annapolis. You guys should all be there in Annapolis to push that issue, because that's where the fight is.
Thank you. Next question from the audience. Over here with Lamont Trey.
Hello, I wanted to ask a question. Okay.
You got to put the mic like directly to a mouth, Trey.
Okay. I wanted to know, are you going to actively have the activists in the community involved in helping you with these problems? Because as I see, a lot of times the activists get thrown to the side as if they just too much, but they would know exactly what's going on in the community. And I think that they should be a part of you coming into community to be able to help the police and the people to kind of get together, because this is a history, and it's something that I don't think, it can happen overnight, because it's a history of police that's actually doing things in the community that they shouldn't. So if it, took 10 years to get there, it may take a couple more years to get back. So I'd like to know, are you involved?
You have 10
now?
seconds.
Okay, that's it.
Okay, so you want to know so inclusion of activists in Baltimore City and how to engage the community and in doing the monitor's work. You want to know how this team would engage activists in doing those things.
Yes.
Okay, my name is John Hudgens. I'm an associate professor of sociology at Coppin State University. First of all, in terms of community engagement, our role is to listen to anybody who's got anything to say. We want to make sure that the input from the community is paramount in everything. The only way we're going to know that this consent decree works depends upon the feedback we get from the community, okay? We're open to activists. We've said that we're going to have a hotline set up. We have looked at almost a staged way of going it, because we recognize we can't reach everybody the same way. So we're going to come up with multiple mechanisms to reach everybody we can. Hotline, an app on your telephone. We're going to be in barbershops and beauty shops. Obviously, we're going to do community meetings. We're going to go to churches. We're going to have satellite offices. So the bottom line is that anybody who is affected by police behavior in this city, we want to hear from them. Not only the bad stuff, but the good stuff as well. One of the things we were talking about earlier this afternoon was the role of video cameras. We want to create a mechanism where if you see something going on, you take a picture, you get it to us, and we take it on. Much of what we're dealing with now in terms of police reform across this country started with video cameras, okay? So if there's something going on, we want to make sure anybody who's abused, anybody who feels that they've been mistreated, they got somebody to talk to, somebody who can point it out. The same thing goes for police officers. We know that there are plenty of police officers who don't particularly like the bad behavior that's going on. We want to create an avenue as well so that they can talk, so that they can be protected. So bottom line is we're input driven. The job of the monitor is really to gauge what the community is feeling and try to support and help the police do what they need to do to bring the two together to create a more conscious, a more comfortable, a safer and proactive community for all of us.
And just want to ask them again, and I apologize for not introducing myself. My name is Neil Franklin, and I'm from Baltimore here. And I understand your question, because some of our activists are shunned from time to time in these forums that we have, talking about the issues of Baltimore City. I've seen it firsthand. And many of you know Shorty. I can have a conversation with Shorty any day. We do all the time. And if I can do that, I can have a conversation with any of our activists in Baltimore City. And I know Shorty won't mind me saying that either.
Okay, this will be the last question, and just for transparency, there are 2 minutes left for this panel, so we need to get a question and an answer in 2 minutes.
All right. Good evening. My name is Joshua White. The police union has the influence to make life difficult for the district attorney pursuing officers with blood on their hands. Ironically enough, I don't recall hearing anything about the FOP in tonight's hearing. So while a question from session 1 concerns the obstacles posed by the Maryland Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, what is in your action plan concerning the obstacles posed by the Fraternal Order of Police?
Yeah, no. Go ahead. That's pretty clear.
My name is Len Lucci. I used to be the county attorney in Prince George's County, which also has a very strong fraternal order police, and which also successfully went through and completed the consent decree process ahead of schedule. when we say that everybody needs to come to the table, everybody needs to come to the table. That includes the rank and file, the police officers, that includes every community organization. We found when there's collaboration and discussion, the result is better. When there's confrontation, you don't have the good result. But when you bring everybody to the table, give them a chance to talk, let people talk with each other, have community mediation between the rank and file police and the community, you get a good result.
And I did mention something about this last question, actually, the alternative hearing board clause, that's exactly what that refers to. But that's a fight, like I said, unfortunately, that's in Annapolis, and we've got to support Mayor Pugh on her efforts to combat that.
The last thing, the consent decree, again, requires certain actions on the Baltimore City Police Department, the city, that they've agreed to. So they will not be an obstacle. They can't be an obstacle. We will report the process, the involvement, the engagement to the judge. This is an agreement. This is a consent decree.
Thank you so much,
The beauty of
Powers
this is
Group.
it allows us to do that.
At this time, we'll ask the Powers Group to exit the stage to our right. And we'll ask the Venable team to enter the stage on the left.
Okay, so I'm very active in community mental health, and currently we have a real crisis of trust of the police when dealing with, well, mental health crises. My organization, we don't really currently recommend that people having a crisis go to the police because by and large, our members don't feel comfortable with the results. Specifically, they feel like they're being criminalized and like force and restraint are being used to an unnecessary degree. And I wonder what you have in store for addressing this either within the police department or in terms of making other resources available to people having mental health crises. Thanks.
So some pieces in there, just really worried about how police engage with people who are in mental health crises, worried about restraint and inappropriate force for people in those situations. And specifically, you have a question for this team about what do they or will they have in place to make sure that those things don't happen? Thank you.
I think there's very legitimate questions because I think in many cities in America we're struggling with the same thing. And the question is, how do we address that you're bringing up? What I'm impressed with is the willingness, thank you. What I'm impressed with is the willingness of the department to tackle these items. And in the conversations with them, I'm impressed with the fact that they want to go forward and make big changes, and I think that's important. What we're looking at is a program that would involve the community, the people, individuals who not only provide services to those individuals who are struggling with mental illness and drug abuse and other behavioral issues as well. But also we want to bring forth those individuals to be part of a committee that would be advocates and individuals who are recovering from mental illness that can make a big difference. Our experience in other cities is that if we do that together, we make not only changes in the police department, but we also make changes in the responsiveness of the mental health system because they want to step forward and provide changes for individuals that they're trying to serve and be able to figure out how can they take that from the individuals from the police and out of the criminal justice system and move them into another situation where they'll be able to respond and get the treatment that they need. Again, I think you will find that the data shows that we're getting not only differences in individuals and in their diversion, but we're also getting a difference in attitude of the community towards the individuals that are struggling with mental illness.
Okay, next question from the audience right here with Trey.
Hi. Given that sexual misconduct is extremely common yet rarely reported, I'm wondering how you'll adapt your approach to reach out to individuals who've experienced that.
Actually, I can speak to that. I was a federal prosecutor for 30 years doing civil rights cases. I actually prosecuted the very first criminal case where we charged a judge for sexually assaulting litigants. But since then, I've prosecuted a number of cases involving police officers using their abuse of power over people in vulnerable positions. So we know those cases, we recognize those cases, and we want to do everything we can to bring that forward. We are going to be dealing a lot of times with the community, those who are arrested many times, people engaged in human trafficking. The transgender community has had a problem. When I was working on the consent decree in New Orleans for the Department of Justice, the transgender youth specifically had a problem with that we helped address and identify officers who were prosecuted for that. So I'm very invested in that. I've spent years of my life dealing with that. And we need all the assistance we can from the sexual assault resource centers as input and helping identify those cases. Once we get the complaints, it's easy. What we have found is it's usually a predatory act, and you can find multiple victims, and so it's no longer one victim against an officer's word. And so we can assist BPD in investigating those cases and trying to bring those officers to justice.
Okay, next question from the audience.
My name is Aaron. I was here yesterday at Coppin and here at Morgan, and as far as the faith-based community, it's been so little mentioned. It was only mentioned briefly by Sister Pitts. But how can you come into the black community and not have a strategy for the black church? I haven't heard any group talk about the strategy or what you have done working with the black church with these issues. This is an issue that's very important to the black church. What is your strategy? Or have you had any success, or what have you done to involve the faith-based community and the black church? I've heard no group speak to this at all.
You have 10 seconds. So the question is specifically, how will this team engage the faith-based community, specific strategies to do that, okay?
Hi, my name is Sherry Woods, and I'm a retired deputy chief from Ann Arbor Police Department.
I think you have to speak closer to the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Sherry Woods, and I'm a retired deputy chief from the Ann Arbor Police Department. One of the strategies that we can use, I know in my city, and I also worked on the consent decree in Detroit, which is a big community about the size of Baltimore, is to engage the Ministerial Alliance. I think almost every major city has a Ministerial Alliance. And like you said, we reach out to those people because you have pastors from all faiths involved in the Ministerial Alliance. And earlier, somebody mentioned that in terms of soliciting from the community or soliciting input from other groups, I think the best start would be the Ministerial Alliance, because my experience in Detroit is that there was very valuable information and insight gained from reaching out to those people. And if you don't have that group, I'm sure that there is some group that's similar to a Ministerial Alliance.
Okay, next question from the audience, from someone who has not asked a question yet.
Do I have time to make a brief comment?
Oh, I'm sorry, was there somebody else gonna answer? My apologies.
In
There's another
response to your comments, my colleagues here from Prince George's County, many years ago from Prince George's County, will recall that when we had a major incident in the county, one of the first things we did was reach out to all of the ministers, because you're 100% right. You are key people in getting the word out to the community, particularly when something has gone wrong and you're trying to work to correct things. So thank you for your comment. That's very important.
That's it? Okay. In real life now, Trey.
Good afternoon, and I want to thank you all for being here. The Venable Law Firm has been involved in litigation defending the state of Maryland against the HBCUs and discrimination. And in fact, one of the attorneys who's in on that case is Mr. Kenneth Thompson. I'd like to know, or for you to tell us, what could you say to convince us that your group, the Venable Law Firm, would do anything other than maintain the status quo? I also wanted to point out that there are also prosecutors on this team as well who are notoriously find ways not to prosecute police. So how do we understand, or how do you convince us that you're better than the other three groups and that you would do something other than maintain the status quo, which is not what we want as citizens?
That's a very fair question, and let me explain it to you this way. I'm a lawyer, and my job is to defend my clients. And I have an obligation under the law to do that. I mean, when you take an oath and you're sworn in to practice law, you don't get to pick your clients. You get So you have to represent your clients and you have to represent them zealously. So that's what I will have to tell you about who I represent. I mean, I represent many clients across the board. And in terms of, whether or not this is going to affect how we proceed with monitoring this case, one has nothing to do with the other. I have a really good reputation in this community as an honest broker. And we need to treat all of the parties the same. And I can assure you that I will do that because that's what I do in my practice.
Are there any other answers?
I'm going to have to disagree with you. I have personally prosecuted and put in prison over 50 police officers. Seth Rosenthal was with the Criminal Civil Rights Unit and has prosecuted many police officers, from everything from excessive force, illegal search and seizure, robbing Latinos on payday. And so I just respectfully disagree. I have devoted my life to that. And I have also caused many officers to be fired when we couldn't make criminal cases. So I would love to talk to you after this is over. I would really like to engage you on that and have an honest conversation and learn where you're coming from.
Okay. Next question from the audience over here with Meach.
Thanks. Just to be clear, I'm a reporter. So there's something called disproportionate minority contact, where the federal government expects states to calculate racial disparities in juvenile criminal justice and then actually come up with plans to do something about it. And it's one of these rare instances where the federal government can withhold funding if they don't like what you're doing. Last time I checked, they did it once in Mississippi. Anyway, I just wondered if, not just you all, Venable, any of the teams, if any of you have are engaging with this potential, this idea of reducing disproportionate minority contact through these programs. There are some great programs led within the community in Baltimore that are DMC programs to reduce, after evening centers and stuff like that.
The consent decree is over the police department. The Department of Justice Special Litigation Unit is broken up into sections. They have a section that handles juvenile justice. I believe you're probably talking about Meridian, Mississippi. Memphis Shelby County has a consent decree against the Memphis Shelby County Juvenile Court dealing with those issues. Unfortunately, this consent decree does not empower us to deal with that other than in dealing with how the police interact with youth and do that. How the court system handles this, which I see in Meridian and Memphis, we don't have any authority at that, but Special Lit, if they were aware of something, they could come in and start a pattern and practice investigation. I hope that answers your question.
So I'm going to check in here, and I will owe Venable 30 seconds. We want to make sure that community members have the option of asking questions. While reporters are obviously welcome to ask questions, I would offer that if you're asking them as a community member, that you not preface your statement with you're a reporter. And if you are a reporter and you have questions, we should wait until the end of the session so that we can. Got it. Thank you so much for the transparency. We appreciate it. Next question for Venable.
Good evening. My name is Dana, and I'm a member of the community.
Thank you very much.
I can tell you why I say that, but that's not why we're here tonight. Earlier, I heard a statement that, in terms of engagement, that you would engage with, and I think this is a quote, community leaders and community activists. And I just want to get clarification, because where I live, the leaders are the activists and the activists are the leaders, and they are one and the same. So I want to hear from you how you define the term community and how you will actually engage with everybody.
And again, that's a very fair question, and I use that term to make sure I didn't exclude anybody. I understand what you're saying, and you're right. In most cases, that's the case. But, I'm not sure that's always the case, and rather than exclude any group, I wanted to use the term to make sure I had everybody on the list, because I do think there are occasions when activists, and I agree with you, they are leaders in the community, but sometimes they're not respected like they should be. And I want to make sure that when we reach out, everyone feels welcome. Everyone understands that their input is incredibly important to this committee. And so that's why I use the term community activists and community leaders.
I'm Jean Wilson Ritchie, and I'm a part of the faith community as well as higher education, well, higher education retiree, I should say. But, I would like to know, in addition to developing stakeholders in the faith-based communities, what about a specific plan for developing stakeholders among young people in that age group that we find is most participatory on the side of the law that we don't want them to be, that we don't want them to participate on? So is there a specific plan to develop them as stakeholders in this process?
I would,
I think you got to move closer to the mic.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would suggest that currently where I work for Washtenaw County Sheriff's Office, and I would be the first to say I think we have some unique ways of engaging youth. And I would love to offer TA, but just to name a few of the things that we actually do is we have sessions. We have within our Sheriff's Office a community engagement section. And so everybody in the Sheriff's Office gets involved in these events, but we do like sessions that are called Just Cause sessions. And in those sessions, we have one-on-ones with youth, maybe take them to lunch or dinner and allow them to have a conversation with the deputy and 5 deputies and then the youth. We also are in the schools. We do a program called TEAM, which stands for Teaching and Educating and Mentoring. So we do that in the middle schools, grades 6 through 12. We also have an Explorer program, which I think is excellent. Most departments do, well, some departments, especially larger departments, have an Explorer program, and it's for kids not only that are interested in law enforcement and that have been in trouble, but then they also want to reach out to other kids that might want to, at some point, just see what being in law enforcement is about. So we open the doors to them. We also have a junior police academy that we conduct every summer. So we have people submitting, youth have to submit applications, and then we choose from that group and we run for 4 weeks a junior police academy. So there are a lot of ways, and some other creative things that we've done is that once we get engaged with youth and we find that they have specific interests, then we start doing educational series. And for instance, somebody mentioned earlier, you have to be transparent. Well, I always say you need to be open and engaged. So we don't try to hide anything from anybody. And in the educational series that we conduct, we've had, and this was just last year, we had series on the hiring process. That shouldn't be a secret to anybody. We had internal investigations. People should know how we investigate complaints. We also had like racial profiling or session, and the sheriff himself conducted that. But again, we involved the youth, and they were very successful. We also do a program that's called Balling in the Willow
Thank you,
series.
Venable. Do we have any new hands before we go? Yep, okay. And we have 2 minutes left.
On camera. Oh, you can hold it. All right. Yeah, my name is Chris Forrest. How are you? And thanks for coming. This is for kind of all the groups, but you guys on stage. One reason you're coming here is because the activists and leaders and others are having challenges doing some of the things that we know need to be done. And you guys are coming in to help facilitate that. Now, I heard a lot of things of getting feedback and moving the process forward. One thing is, how are you going to help those or develop the leaders? Because when everything's said and done and you guys leave, how are you going to help us understand how to hold them accountable going forward? Or these things don't change. I think somebody veered towards that earlier, like once you come in and make recommendations, which is kind of concerned the recommendation of what needs to be done. how are you going to help the leaders or develop the leaders or the community people, or it could be those in the police department, to maintain this going forward
10
and know what to
seconds.
look for?
So you're looking for the consistency, follow through, consistency, and sustainability of whatever the monitors put in or help to put in place. How are they going to make sure that the leaders are able to sustain that after they're gone? Okay?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, for so many times tonight, and so many different of the people sitting up here have talked about the necessity to embrace and empower the community. And truly, Dr. Mears was here. She talked some about procedural justice, and I quoted Sir Robert Peel. But this process is collaborative. It has to involve both community and police, and we have to empower both community and police with the understanding the first day we go into the agency that we're going to be leaving in
Thank you,
hopefully
Venable.
within 5 years.
Thank you so much, Venable. Sorry. So we'll ask the Venable team to exit the stage to our right, this right, and we'll have CNA enter the stage on our left. Thank you.
All right. So we have until 8:50 for this team. So are there new hands in the room? All right, we're going to start over here with, new hand. All right, great. For CNA.
Good evening. I had the pleasure in Newark, New Jersey, working with a team of psychologists and officers in the Newark, New Jersey department, working with trauma-informed training. And something that I noticed during that training is the fact that it's kind of scary that some officers they don't have an understanding of how human emotion on their side and community side can affect their interactions. So what efforts does your team have in implementing trauma-informed training in the future or right now, and how will officers be held accountable for it?
That's pretty direct.
That's a great question. My name's Mai Fernandez, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Center for Victims of Crime. Most of the training that we do is trauma-informed. If you don't know what somebody's background is, somebody's history, if they've been abused before, if they've had bad interactions with police officers before, how they're going to react. They're going to have an instantaneous reaction to a police officer if they've had a bad situation with them before. So officers need to understand that when they come together with somebody, they need to find out who that person is, try to figure out where they're coming from and what their needs are, and not to just jump into a situation because somebody starts being aggressive. They might be being aggressive because the last time they were around an officer, they got beat. So I think that we are going to look at trauma-informed trainings, trying to inculcate them in all of the training that we do throughout the police department, and really try to, it's not only working with the community, you have to understand the community and you have to understand individuals and where they come from. If they've had a bad situation with the police, they're going to react poorly to them. So we're going to really try to work with the police department into having them have great empathy for the people that they're interacting with every day.
Yeah, I'm Steve Rickman. I'm with the monitor team in Albuquerque. It's not just residents that are affected by the trauma. Police officers themselves. Police officers are exposed to trauma situations day in and day out. And often it impacts them in many, many different ways and it affects their performance. So that's something we're going to pay attention to as well.
Okay, next question from the audience. Okay, back here with Trey.
Yes, I wanted to ask a question about the integrity. I'm not really sure whether or not the monitoring will entail that a financial component. We have it has come to light that the police officers are stealing in overtime and some other corrupted kind of financial things. Supervisors signing off on expense reports and they're not legitimate, whether or not there's going to be any monitoring to bring up the integrity level and the ethics within the police department, internal controls, financial matters.
So specifically, financial integrity, that's the
Yes.
piece that you're
To
pulling
ensure
out,
that
and you want to
financial,
know how this
integrity
team
is there.
would ensure that
And
financial
it's
integrity
supervised
is.
by the supervisors that's supposed to be supervising those
Okay,
criminals.
so oversight around financial integrity.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, good evening. My name is Dan Giaquinto. I'm proposed as the deputy monitor. And I'll take the first stab at answering that question. I'm going to pass off to the monitor, the proposed monitor. But in terms of accountability, okay, in terms of if somebody does something wrong, in terms of somebody trying to game this system, in terms of somebody trying to commit fraud, part of this monitoring process and a large part of the consent decree is police accountability. And we're talking about, one, supervisory responsibility, knowing what the people under your supervision are doing at all times, keeping track of them, okay? Number one. Number two, making that referral to the appropriate investigatory agency once there's some indication of misconduct. That is to internal affairs, and also is the process working in terms of referring it to a prosecutorial agency in cases where there may be criminal conduct. Okay, that is part of the monitoring process. We will be looking at that. Are the referrals being made? Are the investigations being conducted appropriately? We will follow the basic principle of you go where the evidence takes you. Is there integrity in that investigation? Is it a sincere investigation? And are the right findings being reached based on the appropriate standard of proof? And then is the disciplinary system taking place? And again, if there's any kind of criminal conduct, whether that is being referred out as it should be, and whether there's good relationship, with the state's attorney's office, so that cases that should be criminal are becoming criminal prosecutions, along with the administrative discipline. And I'll pass it off to Chief Monroe.
I think Dan answered that question, and I see the time, we're running out of time, but that's our response.
Good call. Next question from the audience. Okay.
So my question is, nature versus nurture basically
be next.
states your environment molds who you are. A lot of these kids in the inner city live in some of the worst conditions that you can ever live in. If you drive up and down Baltimore, North Avenue or Hartford Road, you see abandoned house, abandoned house, abandoned house, abandoned house. Baltimore City has some of the worst schools that you can ever imagine. Academically, they rank at a level D. So I want to know, how can groups such as yours, all of y'all, help the city and the government to help these kids that live in poverty? Because if you're going to punish kids, we just talking about police improvement, but that's still punishment. If you're going to punish kids for where they grow up, how they grow up, and what their nature is training and learning and basically molding them to be, then how will we create a better environment? We need to come together more so than policing.
10 seconds.
It's a community thing, because these kids are growing up in some of the worst conditions that you can ever live in.
So you're worried about the conditions that young people are growing up in, also that the appearance of where they grow up, and thinking about how that impacts their what they become, and also their education. It sounds like is really important to you, and you want to know specifically what are things that this team would do to impact the way young people are treated, given the way they are being brought up and what they're being raised in. No, okay. That's good. Okay.
Help the city and the government with these children that are growing up in these environments. So if you're going to incarcerate a young man at the age of 15 that's doing something in the community that he feel like he has no other choice but to do that to survive out here, and you incarcerate him for 5 and 10 and 15 years, when you release that young man back to the community, he has no training, he has no education, he has no skill. So what is he going to do? He's going to turn right back and do the same thing that he was doing before you incarcerated him. So what can we do as a community that's bigger than just policing and punishing and locking these young individuals up. We need to help them, because if you look at our city, we're struggling on every area, especially
So
poverty.
I want to make sure I'm getting to the question that you're actually asking this team has to do with what specifically are they going to do to invest in the youth from the beginning before they are punished for the way they've been raised. Okay.
Again, I think you've touched upon a couple of issues that are critical in bringing about change in any community. And, I don't think police can solely look at crime based on a criminal act. We spoke earlier about diversion and recognize, and part of the diversion is recognizing that there are other systemic issues, especially dealing with youth, that affect why they may commit certain crimes. And I don't think that we can always be focused just on the criminal act itself, that we must do more as a police agency, because police agencies are very influential when it comes to leveraging resources in different areas. And I think that no police department should not want to take the leadership role in helping to develop, whether it's, Baltimore used to have one of the most vibrant recreation centers in the country, and part of that was because it was operated by the police department. That's no longer the case. But I think efforts such as that need to be re-engaged, where not only the Baltimore Police Department, but other community partners need to step up and look to help to address some of the systemic issues that affect juvenile crime, and be able to provide that stepping stone for juveniles, whether it's education, whether it's health, whether it's social skills, whether it's jobs, things of that nature, to allow them to propel a lot further and a lot faster in life.
I think it's also important to think about prevention and engagement. Here, there's a lot of great efforts with youth opportunities, the after-school programming that's available, and the community schools initiative and efforts. And so those are different partners that we would also outreach to. At Coppin State University, we have Coppin Academy, we have a health clinic, we have a child care center. So from all life stages in terms of adolescence up to their young adult years, we provide a vehicle for them to get the kind of support to keep them out of that prison pipeline, right? So how do we work with other community-based organizations that also have the same commitment to be able to do those same results? And so I think that this is a transformative opportunity for our group. And so I'm excited about it, and I hope that we get the opportunity to be able to expand on the type of things we've been able to do on campus throughout the city and leveraging the resources, the energy, and the passion of other partners.
And many of these kids won't come to you. You have to go into the neighborhoods with the assistance and support of community leaders such as yourself to help reach those individuals, identify and reach those individuals.
Thank you. Next question from the audience, back here with Trey.
Is it me?
Yes, it's you.
Okay. I didn't think y'all would let me talk again.
No, we got you.
All right, but my question is to everybody. We talk bad about our police department. I'm saying maybe 90% is good. The other 10 may be bad, and that's everywhere. And you got people in jobs the same way. So it's always a bad apple in a bunch. But my question to all of you guys, because I'm coming out of Philly, I'm not talking about Reigns, but it's real. Who protects the police, right? What they see, like you was talking about the trauma. They see pull a baby out of a burning car. Then the next day, they back at work. We need to think about our officers as they go through trauma day by day. They live just like we live. Y'all on the panel, we out here, that's their life. So who protects the police department as they do the right thing and then still got to go back out there in the street and come back again? This is what I'm saying. A good cop, and I learned this from you too, Ramsey, a good cop that comes out the district, that go in the street. 10 minutes? Okay, I'm ready to go.
That's your time right there.
Take
You
my
had 10
time.
seconds
A good cop that leaves out the district and come in the street, makes a street happen.
Okay, so the officer's mental health is important to you, and you want specifics from this team about how their mental health will be protected.
Yes.
Yep.
How they,
Don't, yeah, right there, boom, okay.
You are absolutely right. Officers experience trauma day in and day out. They see things that we may see once in a lifetime. They see these things every day, and it has a real impact on them. One of the things as a monitoring team we will do is we'll look at their early intervention systems to see if these officers are being recognized so we can get them help. We'll try to look at the support systems they have within the police department to provide help when they need it. And the other thing we've talked about doing also is to do more about recognizing the good things that police officers do. Put them on YouTube, highlight them, commend them. Positive reinforcement works much better, and it's an effective way of changing behavior. So we want to do all those things, but it's important. You want a healthy, focused, mentally stable police officer on the streets, and we all have to play a role in making that happen.
Any other?
I just want to second a little piece of that. Dr. Mike Berlin from Coppin State University also. When community policing is properly implemented, the officers support it, like it, and benefit from it as well. I've seen that in the past. There is a tremendous opportunity here with this consent decree to improve policing in Baltimore. Part of it is a collaborative process to push toward improvement and a dream of better policing in Baltimore. The other part is accountability for officers who don't follow the rules. So the monitoring consent decree provides for both. There's real effort for transformation here, and at the same time, there are provisions for continuing accountability.
Okay, next question from the audience.
My name's Richard Oakes. I lived in Baltimore all my life. I have two questions.
Will you get one?
Oh, one. Okay. Question is to all the panel. What are you going to do to protect whistleblowers in the police department? Now there's a no snitch rule. Cops don't snitch on each other. And what are you going to do about that? So when a good cop reports what a bad cop or cops or even supervision does, what do? He gets punished. He'll be sent out single-handed in dangerous missions, no backup. That happens. So no cop wants to report on fellow cops because he'll be punished. That means there are no good cops because the good
10
cops
seconds.
are afraid to be good, and the bad cops get away with it. So what are you going to do about that?
Okay. I'm gonna just let y'all take that one.
What are we going to do about it? Well, we're going to monitor, okay? And no, wait a minute. It's not that commercial that you see on TV, okay? We're a little more effective than that. We're going to take the consent decree process and do our job. And a large part of that process, as I said in a previous answer, is police accountability. And you're correct. If there is, this culture of, the blue code of silence and all of that, how do you change that, okay? You change it through accountability. First of all, I'm sure that Baltimore has a non-retaliation policy as part of its city government, as part of the police department. Secondly, if somebody is a whistleblower and there's any kind of retaliation taken against them, a complaint is made. We are monitoring how that complaint is handled. Again, similar to my previous answer, it's all part of the internal affairs process. Is there a real, sincere investigation? Are the findings appropriate? And if any charges are sustained, is the discipline appropriate? It's also part of training. It's getting the word out there. Part of monitoring is monitoring the training, being at the training sessions, approving the training, getting the syllabus up front, seeing if there's an exam, seeing the presentation. Is this training real? Is the message getting home? Okay, hitting home. And then a large part of the monitoring process is viewing the supervisory role. That's, I got Army experience. For those of you who are in the military, what's the backbone of the military? The NCO, the non-commissioned officer, okay? That buck sergeant, That's the person who makes the Army run. And it's the same thing in policing, okay? It's that mid-level supervisor, okay? The mid-level supervisor starts up top, leadership comes down, but it's that mid-level supervisor who makes things run. And a large part of this monitoring process is looking at that supervisory process and whether that supervisor is doing his or her job. Do they know what their people are doing under their command, under their supervision? That's how you change the culture, and that's how you protect whistleblowers.
Thank you. And a part of that issue is, and we've kind of had this discussion before, that officers know the right thing. They know what it looks like. But I think leaderships of police organizations have to bake that it's okay in their policy for officers to come forward. They know what the right thing is to do, and with that, we need to continue to stress and assure officers that they need to do the right thing in those situations. And there are other things related to policy and training that we will be looking at within the Baltimore Police Department to make sure that those foundations are in place that will allow those officers as much.
Thank you, CNA.
Thank you.
So, you all, there's only 1 minute. So somebody can ask a question in 30 seconds and y'all can answer in 30 seconds.
Yes. My question is targeted to the woman on the panel. I want to know what is your experience, because the monitors have to be diverse, and what is your experience with working with the LGBT community and the monitoring part of the sexual assault victims? Where's your expertise there when dealing with the inadequacies of sexual assault in the police department and working with the LGBT community?
As I mentioned before, I run an organization that looks specifically at victims. And one of the victim groups that has one of the highest rates of sexual assault is the LGBT community. I think what we have to train our officers to do is to say, I believe. And that means whoever comes forward and says, I was sexually assaulted, I was raped, that regardless of their sexual preference, their gender, who they say they are, that you believe them and that a proper investigation is put forth.
Thank you, CNA. So at this time, we'll ask CNA to exit the stage to my right, and we'd like to thank all of the monitor candidates for their questions and for to the audience for their engagement tonight. Remember that the monitor candidates are available for direct engagement for the next few minutes if you have follow-up questions. Also, remember to fill out your surveys and give them to anyone that you see with a green and black scarf, or you can drop them off right outside the door in the white box to your right. Finally, you have until August 23rd to submit any emails around your thoughts about the monitor candidate to the Department of Justice at baltimore.consent.decree@usdoj.gov. Thank you so much and have a good night.